Welcome to Module 2 of Patient Care Documentation and Athletic Training. As we continue on, we're going to talk a little bit more in this module about some things that are very important within medical documentation to understand before we get into the real in-depth parts of medical documentation and how and what. So to start out with, the purpose is something I feel that a lot of times we forget in athletic training. So within patient care documentation, we know that we do it because we're required to, or we do it because we're worried that, if something happens, we may get sued. And unfortunately, this is a wrong way to think about it. So why we should be doing patient care documentation and the purpose of it is so that way the patient has an accurate and thorough medical record. It's very important in athletic training specifically, as we work with a lot of other healthcare providers, to make sure that this is a correct means of communication. And this may be through the referring physician. This may be through some other parties that are involved with the patient. Additionally, we need to make sure that the purpose of this documentation is communication with our coworkers. So many of you may work in large teams and may see patients throughout the day or the week and not necessarily have that day-to-day care with them. Or even if you do, there's all times that we are not able to be at work for one reason or another. And so by having patient care documentation done well, the athletic trainer or other healthcare providers able to go in and actually see what you did that day before, to be able to get that information and pull it down and be able to understand what, how, and specifically all of the details of what you did. One thing to keep in mind is that if documentation never happened, then the actual event never happened. And I think that's something that we forget. So a lot of times with athletic training, we get busy or we start doing our own thing, or we have so much concern about getting patient care done that we forget about the fact that literally it means nothing in the court of law if we did not document it. And the last point I really want to talk about is it shows our worth as athletic trainers. So within athletic training, we always talk about the cost containment and the value that we have to an institution. But if you have no documentation, you do not have any proof. So this can be a way of showing how many patients that you're seeing, how much you're able to give in services and specific services. And also a lot of places within electronic medical records will actually show you how much you would charge if you were to bill for the services. And this can easily be a way that you gather your information together and you bring it to your staff or your athletics department, or your, hopefully within the medical model over in more of a healthcare setting, and show your worth and show as athletic trainers, this is how much money you save the school by being there and providing this care for your patient population. So it's important, and when we talk about medical records, to understand that there is a lot of protection over these health information of the patients within them. And we're going to talk about 3 different ones today, specifically about HIPAA, FERPA, and HITECH. HIPAA is the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act, and this was first created in 1996. This is that information that you guys understand when you go to a physician's office. You have to sign and date things saying that I understand my rights and my privacy of my medical records. It ensures that no one except for the patient and or the patient's direct caregivers are able to see the records within them. And so that's something that we as athletic trainers have to stay and abide for. So anytime that a patient has any sort of injury or illness, we know that they are, when they're being taken care of us, they are covered provisionally by FERPA. The other thing that we want to think about as we continue is the FERPA, which is the Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act. And this was created in 1974, and it protects the rights of students' personal identifiable information. So specifically as college students, you guys had the right to either sign or not sign waivers that allowed your parents to have some access into your educational rights. And the last one we're going to talk about today is HITECH, and this is the Health Information Technology for Economic and Clinical Health. This was created in 2009, and think about that time. That's when everything electronic started booming even greater than it was. At this time, we continued on and saw an increase of electronic medical records, and we saw an increase of technology and communication via technology. And that's something important to remember, because this is the protection of the e-health. And so anytime we have that electronic transmission of health information, this is covered by HITECH. Depending on where you work in your clinical setting, you're governed by these different bodies. So everyone is governed by HIPAA, as that covers the patient's protected health information. If you work at a secondary school and some colleges, you are covered by a combination of high tech or of HIPAA and FERPA, because this is an educational institution. So you have that additional coverage of FERPA because the medical records are part of the student's overall educational records. And then high tech simply involves any time that you use any sort of electronic correspondence.